Jamal was everything Karen hated, but couldn't admit out loud. A strong, confident black man who didn't flinch when she stared him down, and certainly didn't shrink to make her feel comfortable. From the day he moved in, she saw him as a threat, because he existed in a place she thought should never belong to someone like him. So when he pulled into his driveway with a brand-new red sports car, the last thread of her restraint snapped. Karen didn't just dislike Jamal. She hated that he wouldn't cower. She hated that he belonged. So she pushed further, dragged her husband into the feud, and convinced herself that no one would ever take his word over hers. But what she didn't know was that Jamal had faced real enemies, real battles, and he wasn't about to lose a war on his own doorstep. Karen Caldwell thought she was untouchable. She was dead wrong. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe. The sun hung low over the quiet suburban cul-de-sac, casting long amber streaks across the smooth asphalt and pristine driveways of Brookridge Estates, a neighborhood that prided itself on neat lawns, strict HOA codes, and a suffocating sense of uniformity. The air smelled faintly of fresh mulch and chlorine, the only sounds the gentle whir of sprinklers and the distant hum of cicadas settling into their evening rhythm. That rhythm faltered the moment the deep, guttural roar of a finely tuned engine rolled down the hill. Jamal Thompson's new car, glossy, blood red, and purring like a predator on the hunt, slid into view with smooth precision. Its curves gleamed beneath the setting sun, each polished surface reflecting the sky like molten glass. He took the corner slow, savoring the moment, then pulled into his driveway like a man who had finally claimed something that was his, and had no intention of apologizing for it. The garage door rolled open, and he guided the car inside before stepping out with a relaxed stretch, keys still dangling between his fingers. He wore a dark athletic tee and slate-gray joggers, body lean and coiled with the strength of a man who had trained for years never to relax. Though now, finally, he allowed himself a moment of stillness. He exhaled, slow and deliberate, eyes trailing over the familiar outlines of the house he'd bought less than a year ago. One he had paid for in full with the kind of money people didn't expect someone like him to have. And sure enough, the moment the engine cut off, the silence didn't last. She was already there, Karen Caldwell, standing stiffly in her own driveway across the street, arms folded so tightly it looked like her elbows might snap. Her mouth was tight, her posture defensive, and her eyes locked onto him with the cold, surgical precision of someone who had spent too long looking for a reason to lash out. The way she squinted at the car said everything before her mouth even opened. "Well, that's loud." Jamal didn't respond right away. He set the keys down on the tool shelf inside the garage, took his time with it, then turned to face her fully. His expression was calm, unreadable, but the air around him shifted, just slightly. Not aggressive, not defensive, just alert. "Evening, Karen," he said evenly. She took a step forward off her driveway, not enough to cross the street, but close enough to make sure her words carried. "This is a quiet neighborhood, Mr. Thompson," she said sharply, her voice high and clipped, the words razor-thin with irritation. "We don't need engines that sound like a drag strip shaking our windows. Some of us like peace and quiet." Jamal leaned against the edge of the garage, arms folded casually, weight balanced on one heel. "Then maybe don't stand outside listening to it," he said, voice level. Not loud, not angry, just pointed. Her nostrils flared, barely visible, but the tension in her jaw betrayed her restraint. She'd been waiting for this moment since the day he moved in. Hell, probably long before that. There had been no welcome basket, no polite introductions. From the first day, she had watched him like he was a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong part of town. The occasional garbage can mysteriously knocked over, HOA citations over minor landscaping infractions, passive-aggressive notes left on his door about proper curb appeal. It had all come from her. "You know what I think?" she snapped, stepping closer to the edge of her driveway. I think people who buy flashy toys like that are trying to prove something. Compensation, maybe. Jamal didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He simply tilted his head, that same calm smile inching back onto his face. Compensation, he echoed, the word like a leaf catching the breeze. Nah, just like to enjoy the things I've earned. The smile dropped. The tension between them thickened like oil. Karen's voice sharpened. People like you think you can just move in and disrupt the neighborhood with your noise and your attitude. We've worked hard to keep this place decent. Safe. Jamal's eyes narrowed. Not much, but enough to shift the weight of the moment. People like me, he repeated quietly, the words lingering in the air. Say what you mean, Karen. Go ahead. For a flicker of a second, her confidence wavered. Then she doubled down. I mean people who don't respect rules, who think they're too good for common courtesy, who act like this neighborhood owes them something just because Because I live here? He interrupted. Voice low and calm, but edged now. Bought this house fair and square. Paid in cash. Never missed a meeting. Keep my lawn cut. Garbage out on time. Not a single violation on record. He stepped forward slowly. Not threatening, just deliberate. But you still got something to say every time I breathe. Her lips pressed into a tight line, but her eyes, those eyes didn't blink. The sun dipped lower behind the rooftops, and the shadows between them lengthened. You don't belong here, she said, barely above a whisper, but every syllable hit like a slap. Not with that car, not on this street, not in this community. Jamal stared at her for a long, silent moment. The cicadas had stopped. Even the wind had stilled. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't look away. Neither do you, he said softly. And with that, he turned back toward his house. But the storm had only just begun. Karen didn't return to her porch. Instead, she stood frozen on the edge of her driveway, staring across the street like she could burn a hole straight through Jamal's front door with her eyes alone. Her hand clenched into a fist at her side, knuckles whitening, jaw locked so tight the muscles in her neck twitched beneath the skin. And for a long, brittle moment, she just stood there, as though wrestling with some private storm, trying to decide whether to swallow her pride or spit it back out like venom. Then, with the fury of someone who had already made up her mind before the sun rose that morning, she stepped off the curb and marched across the street. Jamal heard her before he saw her. The sound of her sandals slapping the pavement echoed just enough through the open garage to stir a low sigh from his chest. He turned his head, not fast, just enough to acknowledge her approach, and leaned slightly against the frame of his front door. Arms still crossed, eyes calm but unmoving. She didn't stop at the sidewalk. She came up the driveway with tight, clipped steps, every motion rigid with purpose, as if she were walking onto a battlefield instead of someone else's private property. The late evening light caught the edges of her earrings and the stiff folds of her pastel blouse, but there was nothing soft about her expression now. It was the kind of look that belonged to someone used to getting their way, the kind that came with years of being the loudest voice in the room and never being told no. You think you're clever? She said, her voice sharp and quivering with restraint she was quickly losing. You think just because you've got money that you can buy your way into a place like this and talk to people however you want? Jamal didn't move. Get off my property, Karen. Her eyes narrowed. This neighborhood has rules. I know, he said quietly, and so does trespassing. She stepped closer. Not enough to make contact, but enough that the distance between them now felt deliberate, provocative. You want to play the victim? Go ahead, she spat. But we both know what you're really doing. Bringing that loud car in here, making a scene, flaunting it like you're trying to prove a point. He looked down at her, face unreadable. The only thing I'm proving is that I earned it. Karen's nostrils flared. You're trying to provoke decent people, people who've spent decades building a safe, clean community. You walk in here with your flashy toys and your smug attitude, acting like we're supposed to just roll over and let you turn this place into what? Jamal cut in, his voice still low, but no longer soft. Into a neighborhood where you don't get to pick who deserves to live next door based on the color of their skin? Into a place where someone like me can own a house without you losing your damn mind over it? The sharpness in his voice made her flinch, just barely, but she recovered fast. I'm not the one who got physical first, she said, her voice rising now. You think you're intimidating, but I'm not scared of you. No, he said slowly, his gaze steady. You're scared of what I represent. She stared at him for a long moment. Then suddenly, with a movement so fast it felt almost childish, she swung her leg and kicked the front tire of the car, the rubber absorbing the blow with a dull thud. Jamal didn't react immediately. He just watched her, eyes narrowing slightly, arms still folded across his chest. But now his body had gone still in a different way, no longer casual. Now every muscle was braced in quiet calculation, the way a soldier might measure the distance between cover and danger. I'm warning you, he said, his voice quiet and cold. Don't touch my property again. You gonna hit me now? She said mockingly, stepping closer to the hood. That's what people like you do, right? Start fights? Play tough? Intimidate? Her hand rose, flat and fast, and slammed down against the hood of the car with a sharp metallic crack that echoed down the cul-de-sac. She hit it again. Then again, the sound was louder than it should have been, louder than her small frame should have been able to generate, and with each impact, Jamal's jaw tightened just a little more. On the fourth strike, he moved. It wasn't violent. It wasn't theatrical. He stepped forward, grabbed her wrist, not hard, just enough to stop the next blow, and pushed her back a single measured step. She stumbled. Not far, not hard, but she fell like she'd been shoved down a flight of stairs. Her back hit the pavement, and the scream that followed was loud enough to make porch lights flicker on 3 houses down. She held her arm close to her chest, like it was broken, her face twisted in a mask of righteous agony, and before Jamal could say a word, she was already wailing, "Russell! Russell!" Jamal stepped back immediately, hands raised, already knowing exactly how this would be painted. He looked around. The first porch light had already become 2. Curtains twitched. A door creaked open, and from across the street, he heard the angry rumble of a man's voice, deep and familiar. "What the hell did you do to my wife?" Jamal didn't move, didn't answer. He just watched as Russell Caldwell emerged from the house, already storming toward him, face red, fists clenched, and murder in his eyes. And just like that, the match had finally reached the fuse. Russell Caldwell came down the front steps like a man already halfway to violence, each heavy bootfall striking the pavement with the rhythm of barely contained fury. His shoulders were squared, fists pumping at his sides, and the veins in his neck bulged with the kind of anger that hadn't just started that evening, but had been fermenting quietly behind drawn curtains and whispered conversations, just waiting for a spark. Karen still lay sprawled on the driveway behind him, clutching her wrist like a shattered bird's wing, sobbing with theatrical gasps that rose and fell like stage cues. She kept one eye on her husband, the other darting back toward Jamal with barely disguised satisfaction, her pain exaggerated just enough to bait the narrative before the first punch was ever thrown. "What the hell did you do to her?" Russell barked as he closed the distance, his voice cutting through the heavy dusk like the crack of a whip. Jamal didn't flinch. He didn't move from where he stood at the top of the driveway, hands still raised in plain view, jaw tight with restraint. His eyes stayed locked on Russell's face, watching the way his shoulders rolled forward, the uneven rise of his chest, the clenched jaw that gave away a man who was itching for a reason. "I warned her not to touch my car," Jamal said evenly. "She hit it. I pushed her back. That's it." Russell scoffed, the sound bitter and mocking. "You put your hands on my wife," he said, stepping in close now, so close Jamal could smell the faint sourness of sweat and beer on his breath. "You think you can just lay your hands on her And act like you didn't cross a line? She crossed it first, Jamal replied, still calm, still centered. But there was steel beneath the words now, a quiet promise of consequences. I told her to stop. She didn't listen. You shoved her to the ground like some thug, Russell snapped, jabbing a thick finger toward Jamal's chest, but stopping just short of making contact. Typical, always blaming someone else, always playing the victim while tearing everything down around you. Jamal's eyes didn't leave his. I'm not the one screaming in the street, and I'm not the one trying to turn an argument into a headline. You think you're some kind of hero? Russell growled, his voice dropping into something darker, almost intimate in its malice. Strolling in here with your fancy car, your smug attitude, flashing it in our faces like you deserve to be here? You don't. You think the military makes you special? You think serving gives you a free pass to do whatever the hell you want? I earned my place, Jamal said, quiet now, the words landing with the weight of stone. In this house, in this neighborhood. And you don't get to decide otherwise. Karen whimpered loudly behind them, writhing on the ground like the drama wasn't playing out exactly how she wanted. He attacked me, Russell, she cried, her voice cracking just enough to sound broken. He pushed me like I was nothing. He could have really hurt me. That was the final push. Russell stepped in, chest to chest now, close enough that their shadows merged on the concrete. His hand twitched once, knuckles curling. Jamal saw it all. The posturing, the raw instinct, the way Russell was trying to square up like this was his street, and Jamal was just passing through. You should have kept your head down, Russell said, low and seething. You should have known your place. Jamal's jaw tightened, his voice low and deliberate. That's the difference between us. I know exactly where I stand. Not for long, Russell snarled. Jamal took a step back, not in retreat, but in warning, in signal. His posture shifted, just slightly. Weight balanced now on the balls of his feet, shoulders angled, not aggressive but ready. A veteran's stance, calculated, patient. I'm not going to swing first, he said, voice steady. But I will finish it. Russell laughed, sharp and disbelieving. But there was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes now, the kind of hesitation that came from recognizing on some primal level that the man in front of him wasn't a stranger to violence, that this wasn't going to be a drunken brawl in a bar parking lot where brute strength and loud yelling won the day. Jamal didn't posture. He didn't puff his chest. He didn't need to. Russell spat at his feet, and the muscles in his neck twitched again. You're gonna regret ever stepping foot on this street. Before Jamal could respond, a voice called out from across the street. Is everything all right over there? It was an older man from 2 houses down, standing on his porch, arms crossed, clearly unsure whether to intervene or disappear. His presence did nothing to cool the heat. It only added eyes to the fire. Karen whimpered again, louder this time. He shoved me. He just attacked me, and now he's threatening my husband. Call someone. Call the police. Jamal's patience began to crack. Not fully, but enough to show in the tightness around his eyes. He turned just enough to glance at her, his voice clear. You're lying, and you know it. She's hurt, Russell snapped. That's all anyone needs to know. And in that moment, he stepped forward. Not fast, not loud, just enough. Enough to breach that last inch of space. Enough to justify the next move. Jamal's eyes narrowed. Russell's fist clenched, and the final domino hung in the air, teetering, waiting to fall. It happened fast, faster than most could track. But Jamal saw it coming before Russell even committed. The subtle hitch in his breath, the way his right shoulder dipped, the tension in his lead foot, signals to most. But to a trained SEAL, they were loud as sirens. Russell lunged forward, his arm cocked wide in an amateur haymaker, fueled more by emotion than technique, swinging not to land with precision, but to make a statement, to dominate by force. Jamal didn't retreat. He shifted, weight pivoting smoothly onto his back foot, head tilting just enough for the blow to graze air beside his cheek. And before Russell could recover, before he could even realize he'd swung at nothing but wind, Jamal stepped inside the man's guard and delivered a swift, controlled strike to his abdomen. Not enough to break anything, just enough to knock the air out of him and dismantle the illusion of strength. Russell staggered back, wheezing, eyes wide with shock, more than pain. "You don't want this," Jamal said, voice low but solid. The kind of voice that came from someone who had been in real combat zones, not backyard tantrums. "You've got 5 seconds to walk away. That's your only out." But Russell had never been the kind of man to take a warning, especially not from someone he already saw as beneath him. Humiliation and pride twisted across his face, and with a furious grunt, he charged again, this time leading with both hands, fists flying in a flurry of anger that made up for what it lacked in aim with brute force. The next exchange was clinical. Jamal sidestepped the first blow, caught the second at the wrist, twisted it downward, and forced Russell's arm behind his back in a controlled joint lock that dropped him to one knee. A sharp cry escaped his throat as the pressure intensified, not enough to dislocate, but enough to pin him in place like a trapped animal. Jamal didn't enjoy it. His face didn't show victory, only restraint. Behind them, Karen's scream shattered the air like glass. "He's hurting him. Help! He's killing him." Neighbors stepped onto their porches, drawn by the commotion, some holding phones, others watching from behind screen doors. The entire cul-de-sac had become a theater, and Karen was determined to direct it. "Let go of my husband!" she shrieked, still clutching her wrist, still sprawled on the driveway like a shattered doll. "Somebody call the police, please! He's attacking us!" Jamal released the lock the moment he felt Russell go limp with submission, letting him crumple onto the concrete with a groan. He stepped back immediately, hands raised once more, breathing steady but shallow now, the heat of adrenaline still humming beneath his skin. His eyes swept the gathering audience. No one had stepped in. No one had spoken up. Just widened eyes and muted phones held near their chests. "I didn't start this," he said, loud enough for the nearest porches to hear. "I defended myself. That's all." But the truth didn't move as quickly as Karen's voice. She crawled across the pavement toward her husband, cradling his head in her lap, tears streaming down her cheeks, her voice trembling with performance. "I told him to stop. I asked him to leave us alone, and he just snapped. He hit me, and then he went after Russell. He wouldn't stop." The first sirens echoed from beyond the gates of the neighborhood, still distant but growing louder, slicing through the twilight like a slow, inevitable countdown. Jamal didn't move. He stood in the center of his driveway, car gleaming behind him, his entire body still tense from the encounter, but his eyes sharp, clear, resolute. He knew what this would look like. He also knew how rarely the truth was enough when stories were already spinning into the air. Karen kept her sobs going as the first patrol car rounded the corner, red and blue lights washing over the houses like a warning. The cruiser skidded to a halt at the foot of the driveway. 2 officers stepped out, both white, both hands already near their holsters. Karen pointed dramatically. "That's him! That's the one who attacked us." Jamal stayed still, hands visible, voice steady. "I defended myself. He charged me. She damaged my car and trespassed. I didn't lay a finger on her beyond a single shove to stop her from causing more damage." "Hands where we can see them," one of the officers barked, though his weapon remained holstered, for now. Jamal complied. Russell, groaning, finally managed to sit up. His eyes met Jamal's, not with fear, but with grim satisfaction. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The second officer moved toward Karen, gently guiding her to the curb. The other approached Jamal, his stance guarded. "Sir, we need you to turn around." Jamal's expression didn't change. "You're arresting me? We need to sort things out down at the station," the officer said carefully. "You can explain everything there." "What about her?" Jamal asked, nodding toward Karen. "She started this. We'll take all statements." Jamal exhaled slowly, then turned. The cuffs clicked cold around his wrists. Neighbors whispered from their porches. One woman shook her head. Another raised her phone slightly higher. Karen pressed her face into Russell's shoulder, her sobs muffled now, but no less dramatic. She looked up just long enough to meet Jamal's gaze as he was escorted to the cruiser. Her eyes gleamed with smug triumph. The door closed behind him, and as the cruiser pulled away, Jamal sat in the back seat, spine straight, face unreadable, the lights of his own home shrinking in the rear window. The holding cell was small, barely big enough to stretch his legs, colder than it needed to be, and quiet in the way that wasn't peaceful but watchful. Sterile concrete walls, a steel bench, flickering light above that never quite settled. Jamal sat with his elbows on his knees, his hands steepled, his breath steady, but his mind nowhere near still. He had been in worse places. Dust-swept outposts halfway around the world, enemy territory with no backup, and no margin for error. But this felt different. Because this wasn't a war zone. This was home, and still, he'd been treated like the threat. The moment the word she said left Karen's lips, the officer hadn't been aggressive, just cautious, careful. The kind of careful that meant he didn't need proof when he had a version of the truth that fit comfortably within assumptions. Jamal had answered every question without raising his voice, laid out every detail with clinical precision, but he could still see it in the man's eyes. The calculation, the doubt. He'd spent years serving a country that didn't flinch when it asked him to bleed for it. But the moment he came back and stood on his own 2 feet, in his own neighborhood, next to his own home, it treated him like a trespasser on borrowed time. When the door finally opened, the officer's expression didn't shift much. "Charges aren't being filed right now," he said, like it was a favor. "You're free to go." No apology, no acknowledgement of the lie Karen had spun like thread from a loom, just the cold click of an unlocked door and the long walk back to silence. By the time Jamal returned home, the neighborhood was calm again, too calm. The same manicured lawns, the same still air, the same windows with their curtains drawn just slightly enough to peek through. If any of them felt remorse for watching it unfold, if anyone had bothered to correct the story that night when the siren screamed through the cul-de-sac, no one had said a word. He barely glanced at the dent in the grass where Russell had gone down, or the spot where Karen had dropped to the concrete like she was playing victim in a soap opera. He walked straight into his house, shut the door behind him, and sat for hours. No TV, no music, just him, a cup of untouched black coffee, and the kind of silence that didn't offer peace. It offered space for fury to breathe. When sleep finally came, it didn't last. It was the sound that woke him. The first crack was sharp, violent, surgical, glass against aluminum. The second was louder, more deliberate, like someone was trying to make a point with every ounce of hate they had left in their body. He was out the door before the third strike landed, and there she was, Karen Caldwell, barefoot in her robe, teeth clenched in a snarl, holding a metal bat like it was forged for war. She stood at the center of his driveway, legs braced, arms tight, hair wild in the morning breeze, and she brought the bat down again with both hands, shattering the last intact section of his windshield. "What the hell are you doing?" Jamal's voice exploded across the yard, deep, furious, unfiltered now. No calm, no patience, just rage sharpened by everything she had dragged him through. Karen turned, eyes wide and unrepentant, sweat sticking her robe to her arms, chest heaving from the effort. "You think you can lay a hand on me and just walk away like you're the hero? You think you get to come into this neighborhood, make a scene, embarrass my husband, and nothing happens? You're insane," Jamal growled, marching toward her, arms spread wide. "You really thought smashing my car would make you feel what? Powerful? You come onto my property again, after lying to the cops, and you think I'm just gonna let this slide? Oh, please," she spat, stepping back but not dropping the bat. "You're nothing but a thug with a nice car and a chip on his shoulder." "You're damn right I've got a chip on my shoulder," he fired back, voice shaking with fury. "I earned everything you see here, every inch, every dollar. While you stand there in your crusty old robe throwing a tantrum because you can't stand the idea that I live better than you." She lifted the bat, just slightly. "You want to go again? Hit me this time for real so you can end up back in that cage where you belong." Jamal took another step forward, not with violence, but command. His voice now quieter, but more dangerous than ever. "You hit that car one more time," he said slowly, each word precise, "and I will knock you on the ground so fast your husband won't have time to find your teeth before I drag him through the lawn with you." Karen's eyes flickered. Rage, fear, a flicker of something not yet decided. She lifted the bat again, and Jamal's eyes didn't flinch. "Try me." But she didn't get the chance, because just as she lifted the bat a few inches higher, a door slammed open across the street. Russell, still in yesterday's jeans, no shirt this time, a bruise already blooming across his ribs, stumbling out like he hadn't slept at all, like he'd been waiting, just waiting, for a reason to rejoin the fight. And this time, something gleamed in his hand. Russell staggered out into the morning light like something dredged up from the bottom of a swamp, shirtless, bruised, panting with rage, and holding a gleaming black pistol in his right hand like it was an extension of his ego, like the metal would restore the pride Jamal had beaten out of him in front of half the neighborhood. He didn't shout this time. He didn't need to. The gun said everything. Jamal turned the moment he heard the door slam and froze where he stood, hands loosening at his sides, but never raising, his spine straight, every muscle drawn tight with focus. His eyes met Russell's, and between them stretched a silent, volatile tension that crackled through the humid air like the seconds before a storm splits the sky. Karen stepped back instinctively, the bat clattering to the concrete behind her, her moment of chaos forgotten now that real danger had stepped onto the field. She looked at Russell like she wasn't quite sure whether she had summoned him or lost control of him entirely. "You think you're tough?" Russell said, his voice low and ragged, barely rising above a whisper, yet somehow cutting through the still morning like a siren. "You think beating me down made you some kind of man." The pistol didn't shake. It didn't flinch. It stayed level, pointed straight at Jamal's chest. Jamal didn't move. His heartbeat was slow, trained to be. He measured every inch of space between himself and cover, between Russell and the trigger, between what could be stopped and what couldn't. "I didn't beat you down," he said carefully, eyes locked on Russell's hands. "You came at me. I finished it." Big difference. Russell's eyes twitched, something mean flickering across his face. "You should have stayed in that cell. Should have kept your head down like you were supposed to." "Supposed to," Jamal repeated softly, and the words tasted like poison. "That's what this is about, huh? A black man not knowing his place?" Russell's lip curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You really think anyone's gonna care if I drop you right here? You think when the cops show up, they're gonna believe you weren't threatening us again?" Jamal's fingers twitched at his sides, subtly flexing, testing the air, feeling for that breath of a moment that might give him an opening. But the gun was too close, and Russell's hands too steady for someone with trembling pride. The man was wound tight with humiliation and rage, and Jamal could see it. He wanted a reason to pull that trigger. "There are cameras," Jamal said evenly. "Phones, neighbors. That gunshot goes off, and your whole life ends before mine ever hits the ground." Russell chuckled darkly, the sound brittle and venomous. "You think I care about neighbors? About rules? About cameras?" He took one slow step forward, leveling the gun with a precision that felt too sure, too practiced. "I'm done watching you walk around like you've already won. You think your car, your house, your attitude mean anything here?" Karen said nothing now, her confidence draining with every word Russell hissed. She stared at her husband, then at Jamal, as if suddenly unsure which of them scared her more. Jamal took a breath, just one, measured, controlled. But in his mind, everything raced. The angles, the distance, The weight of the weapon. The way Russell's finger now hovered just a breath from the trigger. He could see it in the man's face, that terrible, irreversible moment approaching. That final, irreversible decision. He was going to do it. And so Jamal moved. Not toward Russell. Not at him. He dove sideways, hard and fast, behind the front quarter of his car, his shoulders slamming into the hood, arm tucked, feet curled in, body shrinking behind the steel frame just as a click echoed. Loud and dry and terrifying. The gun hadn't fired. Not yet, but it had damn well been ready to. Russell shouted something, angry, confused, and stumbling as he moved forward. "Coward! Get back out here! You want to act like a man? Then stop hiding and face me like one." Jamal crouched low behind the car, his mind scanning every possibility, the rush of adrenaline burning under his skin, but not clouding his thoughts. He didn't panic. He calculated. He was unarmed, but he knew how to move, how to survive. That gun was now the only thing keeping Russell brave. He could hear Karen pleading with Russell now, her tone cracking, her fear finally catching up with her bravado. "Russell, stop! Put it down. Someone's going to see this. He's going to call the cops. He's going to—" "He already did enough," Russell bellowed, kicking the side of the car, the steel ringing with the impact. "He humiliated me. He put his hands on you. You think I'm just going to let that stand? Put it down!" she hissed again, grabbing his arm now. "Please, just put it down." Jamal listened, heart still slow, breath steadying. His hand rested lightly on the tire rim beside him, his body coiled like a spring, every second ticking closer to the moment where someone else made the wrong move. He didn't want to fight, he didn't want to kill, but if Russell came around that corner with the gun still drawn, he'd have no choice. He glanced toward the hedges. One more step. If Russell rounded the car, another click from the weapon. Jamal's jaw tightened. This wasn't going to end quietly. The world had gone narrow. From the crouch behind his car, Jamal could hear Russell's boots scraping along the pavement. Slow, deliberate, each step taken with care, as if the man had finally realized just how close the line was, and how deadly crossing it might be. But he was coming anyway. Not charging this time. Creeping, hunting. The gun hadn't fired yet, but the sound of that last dry click told Jamal everything he needed to know. Russell had chambered the round now. It was ready. One wrong twitch, and that weapon wouldn't stay quiet. Jamal tightened his grip on the wheel rim beside him, keeping his breath low, eyes tracking the shadow growing longer beside the car. He could hear Karen still whispering furiously from the driveway, her voice slipping between panic and pleading. But Russell was past listening. Whatever fragile grip he had left on reason had snapped the moment Jamal beat him in front of the neighborhood. And now he wasn't just trying to regain control. He was trying to erase the man who had taken it from him. Jamal waited. 3 steps. 2. He could hear the breath now, ragged, tense, the way a man sounds when he's trying to convince himself that what he's doing still makes sense. Then the barrel appeared. Low. Right, just under the mirror. Shaking, Jamal moved. He dove, not backward, not away, but through the space between them, shoulder first, using the full weight of his body to crash into Russell's chest, just as the man rounded the edge of the car. The tackle was a blunt explosion of motion and fury. Russell shouted, staggered, the pistol swinging wide. But Jamal's hands were already on it, fingers locking around the grip, twisting, wrenching, driving the muzzle up and away from his own chest with years of trained precision. The gun fired. The blast cracked through the air like lightning, echoing down the street, loud enough to rattle windows. Jamal's leg buckled mid-motion as the round tore into his thigh, white heat lancing up through muscle and bone, a flash of agony that tried to steal his focus, tried to drag him down, but his grip didn't falter. His weight didn't drop. If anything, the pain only sharpened his mind. narrowing his vision until all that remained was Russell's stunned expression and the weapon still clutched between them. With a roar that ripped from deep inside, Jamal drove his fist into Russell's face. Once, twice, 3 times, forcing the gun free at last. It dropped to the concrete and skidded away beneath a parked car. Forgotten. Russell stumbled, blood trailing from his nose now, his mouth hanging open in a stunned gasp. But Jamal didn't stop. The shot burned like fire down his leg. Each step forward, another scream through his nerves. But he kept moving, because this wasn't about pain anymore. This was about every shove, every slur, every lie Karen had spewed to the police and to their neighbors, every smug glance from Russell, every false report, every twisted look that said, "You don't belong here." Jamal grabbed him by the collar and pulled him forward into a brutal elbow that sent the man crumpling to one knee. Russell tried to swing, clumsy, dazed, but Jamal caught his arm, spun him around, and slammed him against the hood of the ruined sports car with a bone-jarring thud. "You came into my yard," Jamal growled through clenched teeth, gripping the back of Russell's neck and pressing his face against the dented steel. "You pointed a loaded weapon at me. You threatened my life, and you thought you'd walk away from that." Behind him, voices were rising, neighbors rushing outside now, no longer hiding behind blinds and curtains. Someone screamed. Someone shouted. A phone camera clicked into record mode, but Jamal didn't care. Not yet. Russell tried to push back, grunting through the blood that now poured freely from his nose. But Jamal turned him again and drove his knee into the man's ribs, hard, precise. Russell collapsed fully this time, groaning, wheezing, rolling onto his back in the driveway with no fight left in him. Jamal stood over him, chest heaving, leg trembling beneath the weight of the bullet buried in flesh. But his eyes were clear. Furious, yes, but not out of control. Karen finally found her voice again. "You shot him!" she shrieked, pointing at her husband. "You shot him! You better pray I don't press charges for attempted murder." Jamal snapped, his voice hoarse but thundering. "Because what's coming for you two now? You can't lie your way out of it." Karen took a step back, suddenly aware of just how many phones were pointed in her direction, just how many eyes were watching, not in judgment anymore, but in disbelief. The mask had slipped. The spectacle had been too public, too extreme, too real. There would be no story to twist now. No playing victim this time. And then, sirens. Distant, but no longer slow. No longer casual. Fast, urgent. Jamal turned, breathing hard, sweat pouring down his neck, and slowly limped toward the front steps of his porch. He didn't collapse. He didn't cry out. He sat carefully, leaned back against the rail, and let the burn in his leg remind him that he was still alive. Russell hadn't moved. Karen was still shrieking. And the neighborhood, the same one that had judged him for the color of his skin and the shape of his success, was finally seeing the truth. The sirens grew louder, slicing through the stunned quiet like a blade through fabric, their rising wail announcing the arrival of order, or at least the illusion of it. Red and blue lights began to dance across the pale morning sky, flashing against the windows, casting twisted colors across the stunned faces of the neighbors who had gathered at the edges of their lawns like spectators to a battlefield none of them could look away from. Jamal didn't rise to meet them. He tried. He pushed himself up from the porch step, leg trembling beneath him. But as the adrenaline that had carried him through the chaos finally began to drain from his veins, the pain surged forward like a tidal wave. It caught him mid-motion, seized the muscles in his thigh like fire tearing through dry brush, and dragged him down with a force that made him bite down on a groan so deep it nearly choked him. He dropped to one knee. The driveway blurred around him for a moment, sweat stinging his eyes, breath rasping through clenched teeth. His hand clutched the edge of the porch rail, knuckles white, veins tight beneath the skin, but he refused to fall. Not all the way. Not after what he'd just endured. The first squad car screeched to a stop in front of his house. A second followed within seconds, the tires skidding against the curb, doors already flying open before the engine had even cut. Officers poured out in full response mode, guns drawn, commands sharp and overlapping as they took in the scene. But this time, something was different. This time, they saw the man bleeding on the porch, the woman shrieking incoherently in the driveway, hands streaked with sweat and fury. The man crumpled on the pavement, face bloodied, ribs bruised, arms limp. They saw the neighbors, the phones, the cameras, and they paused. "Guns under the silver SUV!" someone shouted, a young voice from the crowd. The nearest officer pivoted instantly, eyes scanning, weapon lowered slightly now as training took hold, and reality settled around them. Another officer approached Jamal slowly, not like he was a threat, but like he was a man who'd survived one. "Sir," the officer said carefully, voice cutting through the chaos, "you've been shot. We need you to stay seated." Jamal exhaled, sweat rolling down the sides of his face, and nodded once, fingers still gripping the railing. "I'm not going anywhere." Behind him, Karen had begun to spiral. Her voice climbed in pitch with every breath, hands flailing wildly as she backed away from the scene she'd helped create, mascara smudging under her eyes, hair hanging limp and tangled down her shoulders. She pointed at Jamal, at her husband, at the officers, screaming everything and nothing at once. "He jumped him! He came at us again! He was threatening me! He shoved me again! My husband had no choice! He was defending me! He was defending our home!" But the words didn't land like they had before. Not this time. Not with the shattered windshield gleaming in the background. Not with Jamal's blood soaking through his pants. Not with the phone screen still raised, recording every word, every gesture, every last desperate attempt to twist the story. Another officer moved toward Russell, checking his pulse, lifting one of his limp arms as Karen howled, "Don't touch him! He needs an ambulance! He's the one who was attacked." "You said your husband fired the weapon?" the officer asked, voice neutral but firm. He was scared," she stammered. "That man threatened us. He's violent." One of the neighbors, a middle-aged black man from 2 doors down, someone who had never spoken to Jamal more than a passing nod, stepped forward now. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the storm with conviction. "I saw the whole thing," he said. "She was beating the hell out of his car. He came out yelling, didn't touch her. She picked up the bat again. Then the husband came out with the gun." Another voice joined. A woman, early 30s, holding her phone. "I recorded it. He had the gun pointed the whole time. Jamal never laid a hand on her." And then another voice, and another. One by one, the neighborhood began to speak. Not all, but enough. Enough to drown out Karen's shrill performance. Enough to shift the energy. The officers looked at each other, quiet conversation moving between them with clipped nods. One of them knelt beside Jamal, pulling a radio to his shoulder. Confirmed GSW, male, left thigh. Not life-threatening, but he's going into shock. "We need medics. Stat. Copy." Another officer turned toward Karen. "Ma'am, I need you to remain calm and step back." Karen's voice cracked. "You don't understand. He attacked." "Ma'am," the officer repeated, firmer now. "We've got several witnesses and recordings of the incident. You need to step back." Her eyes darted from one uniform to the next, searching desperately for a sympathetic face, and finding none. Her mouth opened, closed, then trembled. Russell groaned from the driveway, trying to sit up. 2 officers moved to cuff him. Karen screamed, and Jamal finally allowed himself to lean back against the rail and close his eyes. The pain was still there, deep, pulsing, alive, but something else had settled in now. Something quieter, heavier. The fight was far from over, but the shift had begun. For the first time since they'd started this war, the Caldwells weren't the ones shaping the story. And the neighborhood wasn't looking at Jamal with fear anymore. They were looking with recognition. The antiseptic scent of the hospital room clung to everything. His skin, the sheets, the air itself. Even with the blinds partially drawn and the lights dimmed, there was no escaping that sterile brightness that hovered in places like this, where people came to be stitched back together after the world had torn something loose. Jamal lay back against the raised bed, one arm draped across his stomach, the other hooked with a quiet IV that pumped slow drips of painkillers into his bloodstream. His left thigh was bandaged thick and tight, elevated on a foam cushion. The bullet had torn through muscle cleanly. No shattered bone, no arteries nicked. But the damage still throbbed like something was burning beneath the skin, pulsing with every heartbeat like a silent clock, ticking toward something he wasn't ready to name. He stared at the ceiling, not because it had answers, but because it didn't. The seconds passed slowly, but his mind raced. He had been shot in broad daylight, in his own yard, by a man who'd already attacked him once and hadn't been arrested for it. A man who walked out of his house that morning holding a loaded gun like he was reaching for a set of car keys. And the woman, his wife, that smug, venomous voice wrapped in a robe and hate. She had been the spark, the poison in all of it. And now she'd stood there with blood on her hands and still tried to cry victim when it all fell apart. Jamal exhaled slowly, his chest rising and falling beneath the thin blanket. He had faced enemies with better excuses for violence than the Caldwells. He had stared down barrel-lined alleys overseas where the only law was survival. But none of that prepared him for the fury that came with being gunned down on American soil in a peaceful neighborhood, after doing everything right. He clenched his jaw, felt the muscles twitch beneath the bandages on his thigh. It wasn't just the pain. It was the violation. The insult of it. He didn't care anymore if Karen had snapped. He didn't care if Russell thought he was defending his pride. He didn't care if the neighborhood tried to look away or pretend neutrality while their silence fed the fire. None of them mattered now. They had turned this into war. And now he was going to end it on his terms. The door opened quietly, and the sound of soft heels against tile broke through his thoughts. He didn't need to look to know who it was. Maya moved like she didn't want to disturb anything, like she knew there was a storm waiting just beneath the surface of the quiet. She stepped to his bedside, her tone measured but not cold. "You awake?" He turned his head just slightly, eyes meeting hers. "Yeah," he murmured. "Barely." She gave him a small nod, then sat in the chair beside the bed, setting a leather-bound folder on her lap, fingers lightly tracing its spine. Her usual sharp energy was there, but beneath it, buried deep, was something else, something personal, a trace of anger that she kept neatly folded under her professionalism. "I just came from the station," she said. "They're holding Russell without bail. He's facing charges for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, unlawful discharge of a firearm, attempted manslaughter, and a litany of secondary counts. Karen's being processed separately. Property destruction, inciting violence, resisting officer commands, trespassing." Jamal closed his eyes, just for a moment, and let the list settle like weight onto a table. It wasn't enough. Not yet, but it was a start. "They're trying to get ahead of it," she continued. "Their lawyers already pushing a self-defense narrative. Karen's saying you escalated everything and Russell just panicked. Typical misdirection, but there are 3 neighbors who've already submitted video footage and testimony. One of them even showed the gun being raised." He opened his eyes again, the fury simmering low in his chest, not burning hot now, but slow, steady, something with shape and purpose. "She called me a thug. He told me no one would care if I died. Then he pulled the trigger." Maya didn't flinch. "I know." He watched her for a moment longer, searching her face for some flicker of doubt, but there was none, just fire, controlled. "Ready. I'm going to make them pay," he said quietly. But the words landed with the full weight of everything he'd endured. Every insult, every scar, every injustice that had built to this moment, not just with charges, with everything, their money, their house, their name. Maya nodded once, not with pity, not with caution, but agreement. "You'll have your day in court," she said, "and I'll make sure every single second of it counts." He looked back up at the ceiling again, not to escape it this time, but to let the moment settle. Outside the window, the sun was starting to rise, its gold spilling across the hospital floor like the promise of a different kind of day. But he wasn't ready to walk in peace just yet. First, there would be justice, and this time, no one would silence him. The ride home from the hospital felt longer than it should have. Jamal sat in the passenger seat, leg braced carefully against a foam wedge, his body still heavy with the ache of the healing wound, though the painkillers dulled it just enough to keep his jaw from locking tight. Outside the window, the streets passed in a blur of motion and stillness, families jogging on sidewalks, sprinklers spinning across clipped lawns, mailboxes standing straight like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. When Maya turned the corner onto his street, the air shifted. It wasn't just the sunlight filtering through the oaks or the soft hum of distant lawnmowers. It was the silence. That thick, calculated quiet that settled over the neighborhood like a held breath. The kind that wasn't about peace, but about watching, judging, measuring. She slowed the car as they reached his driveway. The red sports car was still there, its windshield replaced, the bodywork expertly repaired, not a single dent visible anymore. But Jamal could still feel where the damage had been. He stepped out slowly, using the doorframe for support, his legs stiff beneath him as he made his way up the walkway with Maya at his side. The porch, freshly swept, looked exactly as he had left it, but the gazes came next. From across the street, a woman stood behind her curtain, barely concealed. 2 doors down, a man watering his lawn paused, turned off the hose, and watched. Jamal didn't acknowledge them. He didn't need to. He could feel the shift in their silence, the way it wasn't condescension anymore. It wasn't suspicion. It was discomfort. Guilt, even. Some of them had watched the fight, had stayed silent while Karen screamed lies and Russell waved a loaded gun at an unarmed man on his own property. And now they didn't know what to do with the aftermath of that silence. Inside, the air was still, cool, familiar. But Jamal didn't sit. He walked straight to the kitchen table where Maya had already begun stacking folders, case documents, printed witness statements, a thick manila envelope stamped with the seal of the county courthouse. "Official now," she said, spreading the papers in front of him. "Civil suit has been filed. Damages, medical costs, destruction of property, pain and suffering. I've requested punitive damages on top of it all. The state's case is moving forward, too. Russell's lawyer tried for a plea deal, but the DA shut it down cold. No reduction, no bargaining." Jamal nodded, the weight of it all settling into his chest. Not in a way that crushed, but in a way that steadied. "They're not done," Maya added. "Karen's been posting online, trying to spin the story, painting herself and Russell as victims, claims it was all a misunderstanding, that she was defending herself, that you were the aggressor." He let out a short breath, not quite a laugh, not quite disbelief. "Of course she is. She's tagging HOA groups, neighborhood forums. She's trying to rally support before the trial. She knows what's coming. She's grasping for anything that'll stick." Jamal moved to the window and looked out at the street, not searching for her, not this time, but watching the rhythm of the block itself, the way it tried to pretend it hadn't been a war zone just days ago, the way the Caldwell's house, still occupied but now surrounded by an uneasy perimeter of distrust, seemed to exist in shadow even under the sun. "They want sympathy now," he said. "After everything." "They're not going to get it," Maya replied firmly. "Not after the footage, not after the witnesses, not after that police report. Their credibility is shredded." He turned back to her, his voice quieter now but no less resolved. "This isn't just about them. It never was. They thought they could push me out because I didn't fit into their perfect little picture, because I live loud, because I won't shrink myself to make people like them feel comfortable. They needed me to be the problem. And now, she said, her eyes sharp, they've become the problem for everyone else. There was a pause, short, but heavy with clarity. They get a trial, he murmured, almost to himself. I get justice. Outside, a child on a bicycle pedaled past slowly, his eyes flicking up at Jamal through the window before quickly darting back to the road. Another neighbor across the street, the one with the narrow glasses and clipped speech who had once filed a noise complaint over Jamal's lawnmower, now stepped out to collect his mail, and didn't make eye contact at all. That was fine. Let them stew. Let them squirm under the weight of their own silence. The truth had momentum now, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, Jamal didn't feel like he was the one being watched. He felt like the one doing the watching. They'll have their day, Maya said, rising and collecting the folders again. And you'll have yours. He watched her for a moment longer, then nodded once, the pain in his leg pulsing beneath the surface, like a reminder of everything that had been taken from him, and everything he intended to take back. The courthouse sat heavy in the heart of downtown, not majestic in its architecture, but imposing all the same. A pale stone monolith that loomed above the square like a permanent reminder of who got to speak, and who had to wait for permission. Inside, the halls echoed with the soft thrum of murmured voices, leather shoes, shuffled papers, everything humming beneath the surface, a pressure that never quite broke but never let up either. Jamal sat at the plaintiff's table, back straight, suit sharp but not loud, hands resting on the wood before him like anchors. His face was calm, but beneath that stillness lived a storm, controlled, measured, but never gone. The bandage beneath his pant leg pressed lightly against his thigh, a dull ache reminding him that some scars didn't wait to fade. They throbbed in time with the truth. Across the room, Karen and Russell sat with their attorney, a man who looked like he belonged more in a luxury car ad than a courtroom. Slick, tanned, sharp-jawed, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and a voice that knew exactly how to bend sympathy until it sounded like reason. Karen looked pale, brittle. Her usual fire had dimmed to a flickering whisper. She wore a gray suit, pearl earrings, her hair tied back too tightly. Every once in a while she glanced at Jamal, but she never held the stare. Russell, by contrast, sat with his arms crossed, shoulders stiff, jaw clenched like a man who still didn't believe he'd done anything wrong. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, except he couldn't run now. Not with cameras outside, not with his name already in headlines. The judge entered, everyone stood, and just like that, the trial began. Opening arguments were quick, Maya's voice cool and steady, laying out the timeline with surgical clarity. No exaggeration, no theatrics, just facts, reinforced by timestamps, witness accounts, and a growing stack of digital evidence. The defense followed with a subdued version of events. Karen and Russell, frightened homeowners, victims of escalating aggression, pushed too far by a man who wouldn't de-escalate. Words like misunderstanding and emotional distress floated into the air like perfume, designed to linger, not persuade. But no matter how carefully the defense crafted its story, cracks appeared early. The first neighbor took the stand. A woman from 2 houses down, white, early 40s, eyes sharp behind her glasses. She recounted what she saw, how Karen smashed the windshield, how Russell pulled the gun, how Jamal didn't make the first move. She didn't embellish. She didn't hesitate. She just told the truth. Then came the videos, one after another, played in full, no cuts, no commentary, just raw footage of Karen in his driveway, the baseball bat raised over her head, Russell creeping toward the car, gun drawn, Jamal diving for cover, wounded, then rising and disarming his attacker. The courtroom was silent except for the audio. Karen's screeches, Russell's threats, the cold, unmistakable crack of the gunshot. When the final clip ended, no one spoke for several seconds. The defense tried to recover. Russell's lawyer objected, tried to discredit the videos, poked holes in timing, questioned the motivations of the witnesses. But it was like trying to tape a shattered window back together. The damage had been done. And then it was Jamal's turn to speak. He rose slowly, his movements still slightly stiff, though not from weakness anymore. Every step to the stand carried the weight of everything they'd tried to take from him. His dignity, his safety, his right to exist without fear of false accusations and loaded guns. He sat, adjusted the mic, and looked out at the courtroom, not just at the judge, not just at the jury, but at them, Karen, Russell, the people who had turned his life into a war zone because they couldn't bear the sight of a man like him living free, proud, and unshaken right next to them. When Maya asked him to begin, he didn't launch into an emotional speech. He didn't need theatrics. He spoke plainly, but his voice carried power. I moved into that house because I earned it. I didn't inherit money. I didn't win a lawsuit. I served. I fought for this country, and I came home hoping I'd find peace in a place like that. He let that hang. But from the first day, I knew I was being watched, not because I broke rules, not because I was a threat, but because I didn't look like what they thought belonged there. He spoke of the first warnings, the citations, the notes, the glares, the simmering tension that finally boiled over the moment success pulled into his driveway wearing a red coat of paint. I didn't start anything, he said, his voice steady, but I finished it. Because if you let people like that think they can do whatever they want without consequence, they'll never stop. Karen wouldn't look at him. Russell stared, jaw tight, hands curled into fists. Jamal stared right back. I was shot. On my own property. Because they couldn't stand the idea of me living without fear. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. But when he stopped speaking, the silence that followed was heavier than anything he could have said next. The air in the courtroom had changed. Jamal's testimony hadn't ended in applause. It hadn't needed to. What followed wasn't celebration. It was silence, taut and unyielding, the kind that settles when everyone in the room knows the truth has finally taken up residence and refuses to leave. Even the jury, previously impassive behind their polite expressions, now leaned forward, not out of curiosity, but gravity, as if the weight of his words had pulled them closer without their permission. The judge called for a recess, and when the session resumed, everything felt different. Maya stood to cross-examine Karen first. There was no warmth in her tone, just a sharpened edge, dulled slightly by formality, the way a scalpel gleams beneath surgical light. Mrs. Caldwell, you testified earlier that you feared for your safety when you saw Mr. Thompson exit his home that morning. Is that correct? Karen nodded, her voice tight. Yes. You also stated that you believed he was a danger to your personal property? Yes, she said, fidgeting with her bracelet. Given his earlier behavior, I had every reason to believe he would be violent. Maya stepped forward, slow and precise. Your earlier behavior, you mean? No, I meant his behavior. Maya didn't blink. Let's talk about yours. On the morning of the incident, you entered Mr. Thompson's driveway with a baseball bat. Is that correct? Karen hesitated. Yes or no, Mrs. Caldwell? Yes. You then struck his car multiple times. Karen's voice grew quieter. I was angry. And when he confronted you, did he touch you? No. He shouted at me. But didn't lay a hand on you? Karen looked toward her attorney, who gave her the barest of nods. No. Maya paused, giving the jury just enough time to let the word hang there, alone. And when your husband appeared with a firearm and pointed it at Mr. Thompson, did you try to stop him? I told him to put it down, Karen said. But even she sounded unconvinced. And yet, you didn't call the police? I didn't think it would get that far. Maya's eyebrows lifted, just slightly. You didn't think pulling a loaded weapon on an unarmed man in broad daylight would go that far? Karen's breath caught. Her composure, thin as gauze, finally tore. He wouldn't back off, she snapped, the words flying faster now, her voice rising with a frantic edge. He kept provoking us. He stood there like we were nothing, like he was the one being attacked. He had that tone, that look, like he was daring us to do something. The words spilled too fast, unfiltered, and Maya stepped back, letting them echo. Karen saw her mistake too late. The judge leaned forward slightly. The jury stiffened. Maya's voice softened, cutting more precisely because of it. Mrs. Caldwell, was it the sound of his voice, or the fact that he didn't sound afraid? Karen blinked. Was it his words that threatened you, or the fact that he didn't shrink when you demanded he make himself small? Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again. The stillness that followed was suffocating. No further questions. Karen returned to her seat like a marionette with half its strings cut. She didn't glance toward her husband. She didn't look at the jury. She stared straight ahead, lips parted, eyes glassy with something that wasn't quite tears, more like unraveling. Russell was called next. He moved to the stand with more resistance, as if his body understood what his mind still denied, that the fight was already lost, and all that remained was the ritual of defeat. The prosecutor handled the questions this time. Mr. Caldwell, you drew a weapon that morning. Yes. You fired that weapon. Yes. Who was your intended target? Russell's jaw flexed. The man threatening my wife. The prosecutor held up a photograph. Jamal, unarmed, hands open, body half-turned in retreat. Is this your idea of a threat? Russell didn't answer. Was he armed? No. Was he on your property? No. Did he cross the street toward your home? No. Did he raise a hand to you? Russell's fingers tapped once against the wood of the stand. Not until after I raised the gun. And you fired it. Russell's voice dropped. Yes. The prosecutor let the admission breathe. Do you know what that's called, Mr. Caldwell? Russell's nostrils flared. It's called attempted manslaughter. Russell glanced toward his lawyer, but the man looked down now, suddenly more interested in his notes. And your wife, the prosecutor continued. Did she ever ask you to bring the gun out? She was scared. Did she say the words, Mr. Caldwell? Russell's voice was dry, resentful. No. Did you? Another long pause. Yes. The prosecutor lowered his papers, folded his hands. No further questions. The courtroom sat in dense silence as Russell returned to his seat, his eyes burning with something that might have once been pride, but now only smoldered with the humiliation of a man forced to speak truth with everyone watching. The judge looked over the room. This court will recess until closing arguments tomorrow morning. The gavel struck once. People stood, but Jamal remained seated. He didn't move, didn't rush. He watched Karen and Russell shuffle out of the courtroom, their shoulders hunched, their heads down. The same people who had once stood tall in their front yard, sneering across the street like they owned the world, now retreating from it, watched by the very neighbors who had once kept their silence. The same people who had once stood tall in their front yard, sneering across the street like they owned the world, now retreating from it, watched by the very neighbors who had once kept their silence. The tide had turned, and justice was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable. Morning light filtered through the high windows of the courtroom, casting long rectangles of gold across the wood-paneled walls, softening the sharp corners of the room without easing its tension. The atmosphere was electric, not loud, but heavy, each breath taken as though it might carry weight it couldn't hold. Even the jurors looked changed, eyes darker now, their stillness not of nerves, but purpose. Jamal sat in the same seat as the day before, his body upright, leg resting carefully beneath the table, though he no longer needed the cane to move. The wound still ached, dull and constant, but it was no longer a burden. It was a mark, a truth carved deep enough that no lie could cover it. Across the aisle, Karen fidgeted with a tissue she hadn't used, twisting it between trembling fingers, like the motion might erase the expression staring back at her. Russell sat stiffly beside her, His jaw clenched, the last traces of arrogance drained from his posture. Their lawyer whispered to them, his voice hushed, lips tight, already preparing for damage control. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Everyone sat. Then came the final words. The prosecution rose first, voice calm but laced with steel, laying out each charge like bricks in a wall no defense could climb over. Aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, use of a deadly weapon, malicious destruction of property. They didn't reach for drama. They didn't need to. The evidence had already spoken. This was only the echo of what had already been made undeniable. Maya stood next. Her voice didn't waver. She didn't posture or press. She spoke like a woman with the truth at her back, solid and immovable. "What this case is really about," she said, eyes sweeping across the jurors, "is not just violence. It's about audacity. The audacity of two people who believed their fear, no matter how irrational, no matter how rooted in bias, was justification enough to destroy property, threaten life, and try to bury a man beneath lies when the truth refused to bow to their expectations." She turned slightly, gesturing toward Jamal. "You saw the footage. You heard the testimonies. You know this wasn't about self-defense. It was about control, about punishing a man who refused to make himself small." She paused, letting the silence breathe between them. "This is about accountability. Let it be known that here, today, that still means something." She returned to her seat without fanfare. The defense followed, brief, subdued, built from apologies and soft denials. Their argument wasn't defiant anymore. It was desperate, a plea for leniency, for understanding, for sympathy they had long forfeited. But the room didn't respond. The tide had gone out, and their words receded with it. The judge nodded once, hands folded before him. The jury was dismissed. And then came the waiting. 47 minutes passed. Jamal didn't look at the clock. He sat still, back straight, the pulse in his jaw the only thing that moved. Maya sat beside him, watching the door, saying nothing. Across the room, Karen had folded in on herself, shoulders hunched, tissue still clenched, no longer moving. Russell's eyes stayed fixed on the floor, as if by avoiding everyone else's gaze, he could unwrite the story, now set in stone. When the jury returned, it was silent. Even the shuffle of feet felt deliberate. The foreman, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled tight and clear, steady eyes, rose as the judge prompted her. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "And how do you find the defendant, Russell Caldwell, on the charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon?" "Guilty." "And on the charge of attempted manslaughter?" "Guilty." "And on the charge of unlawful discharge of a firearm?" "Guilty." The words didn't need to rise in volume to hit like thunder. Karen sat frozen, lips parted, her face drawn tighter with each syllable. "And how do you find the defendant, Karen Caldwell, on the charge of incitement to violence?" "Guilty." "On the charge of malicious destruction of property?" "Guilty." "On the charge of filing a false police report?" "Guilty." Russell closed his eyes. Karen shook her head once. Slow, disbelieving, like she'd heard the words but not understood them, like they didn't fit inside the version of the world she'd always clung to. The judge thanked the jury, dismissed them, and then the room fell into a deeper silence as he turned to face the bench, his voice steady, his words deliberate. "I've reviewed the evidence extensively. I've watched the footage. I've read every report and listened to each testimony. What stands out to me most is not just the crime, but the entitlement that fueled it." His gaze moved to Karen, then to Russell. "You didn't simply act in anger. You acted in belief. Belief that your discomfort justified violence, that your fear, however ungrounded, gave you the right to inflict harm and spin lies in the aftermath." He looked down, shuffled the papers once. "For Mr. Caldwell, you are hereby sentenced to 8 years in state prison. No parole eligibility before year 5. Karen inhaled sharply, eyes darting toward her husband. "For Mrs. Caldwell, You are sentenced to 3 years for incitement, property destruction, and false reporting, to be served consecutively with a mandatory 12-month minimum. A sharp gasp broke from her throat. Jamal didn't move. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. He just let the moment settle. Let it be, because it wasn't about vengeance. It was about the truth, finally having the last word. And for the first time since it all began, that word didn't belong to them. The courtroom had emptied, but Jamal sat still, his hands resting quietly on the polished wood, the echo of the gavel still lingering behind his ribs like the tail end of a heartbeat. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply let the moment stretch out, slow and quiet, until it no longer needed to be held. It wasn't joy he felt. It wasn't even relief. It was something deeper, heavier, quieter. It was closure. And when he finally rose from the seat and stepped out into the soft light spilling through the courthouse doors, he didn't look back. The drive home was quiet. Maya didn't talk, and neither did he. She let him have the silence, let the weight settle in his chest, the way gravity keeps a man grounded. It wasn't over. Not completely. But the most important part, the part where the truth had stood its ground and refused to bow, that was done. When they pulled up to the house, the neighborhood looked the same. Same hedges, same clean sidewalks, same mailboxes with neatly painted numbers. But there was a difference now in the way people looked at him as he stepped out of the car. Not everyone came out to speak. Some turned away. Some peeked and disappeared behind curtains. A few couldn't meet his eyes at all. But others, quiet, unsure, offered nods. One woman from across the street murmured a greeting. Another, an older man with a gentle limp, simply placed a hand on his chest as he passed, a gesture not of pity, but of respect. Jamal nodded once in return. He wasn't looking for apologies. He wasn't chasing recognition. He had only ever wanted to live, to exist without having to justify himself. Inside the house, the light through the windows warmed the hardwood floor. The silence no longer felt tense, no longer hostile. It felt earned. He had made it back, and that, in itself, was no small victory. Maya followed him in, setting a thick envelope on the kitchen table without a word. He raised an eyebrow at her. She gave a small, tired smile, the kind people give after long battles, when the smoke's finally cleared and all that's left are facts. "It's official," she said, taking a seat, her tone steady. The civil ruling came through. He lowered himself into the opposite chair slowly, his legs still stiff. The pain a dull echo now rather than a roar. "You won," she continued, sliding the envelope toward him. "The court awarded you full damages, medical expenses, vehicle repairs, emotional distress, lost income, and," she added, tapping her finger on the edge of the envelope, "punitive damages." He opened it, skimmed the document, and then the number, bold, final, met his eyes. He didn't react right away. He didn't need to. But something settled in his chest, like the weight of a door finally clicking shut behind him. "They'll have to liquidate assets," Maya said. "The house will go on the market. Accounts frozen. A lien on the rest. You'll start seeing payments within 60 days. Jamal exhaled, a slow breath that felt like it came from somewhere older than his lungs. "You sure they won't try to hide it?" he asked. "They can try," she said. "But this isn't going away. Not like they're used to. Not this time." He nodded once, fingers still resting on the paper. "They're going to feel this one," she said, more softly now, "the way they made you feel it. Not just time in a cell, not just shame, but actual, lasting consequence." He looked up at her, and for the first time in days, there was a faint trace of something lighter in his eyes. Not happiness, but satisfaction. "I didn't ask for any of this," he said. "No," Maya replied, "but you answered it better than most ever could." They sat in silence a while longer, the sunlight crawling along the walls as afternoon crept toward dusk. Eventually, she rose, gathering her things, offering a squeeze to his shoulder, before heading to the door. "You'll be okay?" "I've been okay," he said. They just didn't want to believe it. She smiled faintly, nodded, and stepped out into the sun. When the door closed behind her, Jamal turned back toward the envelope, studied the weight of what it meant. Not just financially, but symbolically. Not because he needed the money to prove a point, but because it served as something tangible. Something that would echo louder than gossip, louder than silence. Something they couldn't erase with another lie. He stood, made his way to the porch, and eased himself into the wooden chair by the rail. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and blooming dogwood, and for the first time since he'd bought the house, he let himself just sit and be. No noise, no conflict, no performance. And across the street, the Caldwell house stood empty now. Windows dark, curtains drawn, a for sale sign planted neatly into the earth like a quiet surrender. Jamal didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. They were gone, and he was still here. Not because he fought harder, but because he never stopped standing. Recovery came slowly, not just in muscle and movement, but in the deeper places. The ones where memories stayed, where voices echoed, where something sharp still lingered in the silence. But Jamal didn't rush it. He let the healing take its time, just as he had taken his. He spent his mornings walking farther with each sunrise, the cane no longer a crutch, but a companion, something that slowly became unnecessary. By the second month, he was jogging again. Not fast, not for show, just enough to remind his body that it still knew how to move freely. He worked with Maya, helped her build out her firm's veteran legal outreach program. Quiet meetings, phone calls, strategy sessions, all focused on giving other men like him the tools to fight battles they never should have had to face alone. He never asked for attention. He didn't want recognition. But the word still spread, and over time, the neighborhood began to change in subtle, undeniable ways. The HOA, once a shadowy gatekeeper for people like Karen, now had a rotating board. Faces that had once been closed off became polite, cautious, and slowly, genuinely respectful. Neighbors who hadn't spoken before now waved. A few even brought over pie or asked how the leg was healing. Jamal didn't forget the way they had watched in silence before, but he understood that change, even late, was still change. He accepted it without bitterness, but not without memory. Then, one warm Saturday afternoon, nearly 3 months after the verdict, he woke to the sound of a moving truck backing up across the street. He stepped out onto the porch, coffee in hand, wearing an old gray t-shirt and sweats, leg braced but light now. He didn't react at first, just watched. 2 men stepped out of the truck. One, tall and broad-shouldered, carried a box with ease while laughing with someone behind him. A woman stepped into view next, black, mid-30s, with a long braid pulled over her shoulder and a clipboard in hand. She looked up at the house with a soft, appraising smile before turning to say something to the man who kissed her on the cheek and moved toward the porch. Jamal's brow lifted slightly, not in surprise, but recognition. The house was no longer theirs. The Caldwells were gone, and in their place was something new. He crossed the street slowly, hand loose at his side, every step steady. The man noticed him as he approached and set the box down with care. "Afternoon," the man said. His voice was warm, grounded, confident, but not arrogant. "Afternoon," Jamal replied. "You two moving in?" The woman stepped closer, smiling. "Just got the keys yesterday. Thought we'd start unloading before the worst of the heat hit." Jamal looked over the front yard. Same hedges, same walkway, but it already felt different. Lighter. The shadows that once clung to that house had begun to lift. "Well," he said, offering a hand. "Welcome to Brookridge." The man shook it firmly. "Thank you. I'm Marcus. This is my wife, Tasha. Been looking for a while and figured this place had what we were after. Quiet, clean, decent schools nearby. Didn't expect it to open up so fast, though." Jamal let a faint smile show. "Yeah, that house had history," Tasha raised an eyebrow, her expression curious but not alarmed. Good history or bad? He tilted his head. Let's just say, you won't be the first black homeowners to shake this street up a bit. Marcus chuckled, glancing at the porch. Let me guess, old owners weren't exactly throwing welcome parties. They threw something, Jamal murmured, just loud enough to make them laugh. Tasha stepped a bit closer, her voice gentler now. You were the one on the news, weren't you? The court case, the shooting, everything. Jamal nodded once, slowly. That was me. She didn't look away, didn't apologize. She simply nodded back. We read about it, not just the headlines, the actual story. What you did, the way you handled it, she shook her head. You stayed standing. A lot of people wouldn't have. He gave a small shrug. Didn't see another option. Marcus crossed his arms. You set the bar high, brother. This neighborhood, it's got a different energy now. I don't know what it was before, but I can tell it's not what it used to be. Let's hope it keeps moving in the right direction. They stood there for a moment, sunlight catching the edge of the roofline, the breeze lifting the corner of a tarp covering one of the porch chairs. It was quiet, but this time, not heavy, not tense, just peaceful. You ever need anything? Jamal said, nodding toward his house across the street. I'm right there. Toolbox, backup hands, or just someone to talk to. Marcus smiled. We appreciate that. And hey, once we get settled, we'll be firing up the grill. You're invited. I'll bring the bourbon, Jamal replied, already turning to head back home. You drink bourbon? Marcus called after him. I do now. Laughter followed him across the street, soft and rich, folding into the warmth of the day like something natural, something good. Jamal stepped onto his porch again, settled into the chair beneath the overhang, and watched as the truck slowly emptied, one box at a time. Across the street, a new chapter was unfolding, and for the first time in a long time, Jamal felt not just at peace, but at home. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.